Analysis on events in Tripoli. Former U.S. diplomat in Libya, John Graham, joins us live from the U.S. Now, you are a former U.S. diplomat in Libya. You are experienced with the regime. How do you think Colonel Qadhafi's fate will play out at this point?
Well, I've said from the beginning that the one thing that you can predict about Colonel Qadhafi is that he's unpredictable. I do think, though, that the guy really does have a messiah complex, and it's quite likely that he will go down fighting. He's always said he would, and he now apparently is holed up in Al-Azizia barracks, and he could very well do that. I would be surprised if he ended up, say, in Colombia or Zimbabwe as a refugee. It could happen. He's unpredictable, but I doubt it.
Now, we are hearing that the road to Tunisia is blocked by rebels at this point. Why are these routes blocked, and is this to capture Qadhafi loyalists or to prevent people from escaping the country? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm not at the border. Your reporter's there at the border, but I would say they're probably making sure that some of the key players in the old regime don't get off. They'd rather take them to court. There certainly would be no reason to stop free movement of people if in fact the rebels have now won and are establishing a democratic government. Then, of course, freedom of movement would be part of that.
At this point, in almost every nation touched by the Arab Spring, successful anti-government movements have found little change with the coming of a new regime, like in Egypt, for example. Do you think Libya will be different, and if so, why?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with that premise. I was talking with a bunch of the revolutionaries from Tahrir Square in Switzerland last week. And what's happened is that the army is temporarily in charge, but elections have been scheduled for September and again in December for a new government. So while the many of the people that were rebelling in Tahrir Square are impatient, they may yet get what they want. They'll just have to wait a little longer for it. But in Libya, different questions. I was saying, I think on this program yesterday, the day before, there is so little civil society in Libya. There's so few democratic institutions, and they're so weak. They have nothing to build on. In Egypt and Tunisia, there was at least something to build on once the top fellow was gotten away with. In Libya, that's not the case. These people have to start from scratch, and there are all kinds of reasons why it could fail. One is that the whole nature of the transitional council is it's a mess. These people are, some of them are exiles, some of them have fled from the Qadhafi regime. A few of them are Islamicists. Some are intellectuals and college professors. Some are business people. So just hanging together is going to be an enormously difficult task for them. The other thing is that they've got to avoid reprisals. They can't have reprisals against their enemies. It will just create the kind of civil strife that everyone wants to avoid. And finally, there's the question of tribal warfare or cultural warfare between the Berbers and the Arabs. And they've got to be very careful that doesn't happen as well. One of the positive things in the last couple of weeks is that a lot of the heavy fighting in the Tunisian border and in Tripoli has been led by the Western tribes. So this is not just a question of disgruntled Eastern tribes taking over the country. So that's a positive step, that the traditional East-West tribal splits in Libya may not be an entirely negative factor.
You mentioned that the tribal splits are actually working as part of this revolution to some degree, but there's also some criticism that Western countries are playing a role as well. What role will the U.S. play in the future of Libya?
Well, I think you have to take the American President Obama at his word in the statement he made, and very much echo the statement that Mr. Cameron made, that France and England and the United States are working toward, they want a free, democratic, and inclusive Libya. I think they made it very plain that NATO will not send troops on the ground. I take them at their word for the moment.
Now, there's a lot of suspicion that al-Qaeda could be part of these rebel groups. Can the rebels run their country, or do you think there could be a power vacuum that could get filled by radical terrorist elements?
There's definitely a question of a power vacuum, and for the reasons I was talking about earlier, these people simply may not be willing to get along. And it's just human nature that once the main battle is fought, then the schisms and the fractures begin to appear once the main danger is past. So we don't know what's going to happen. They're going to have to struggle to stay together. And if they don't stay together, that will, of course, open, as you say, a power vacuum into which Islamicists and other people could gain power that perhaps would not be for the best interest of the Libyan people or for the Western nations.
What do you see as the key factor that needs to happen if for these groups to work together to be successful?
Well, there have been good reports coming out of Benghazi from a number of people that have talked to these people, and they're getting rather high marks as being, how shall I say it, public-spirited Democrats, willing to work together to seek compromise. So maybe that will continue. I hope that it does, because if it doesn't, again, because Libya has so few democratic institutions, and in fact so few institutions of any kind, even a modest fracturing of the transitional council could mean total chaos.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. John Graham, former U.S. diplomat in Libya.
My pleasure.